In the early 14th century, Europe was a continent in transition. Dynasties rose and fell, borders were contested, and kingdoms were locked in delicate alliances and rivalries. At the heart of this political landscape was the Kingdom of England, ruled by King Edward III, one of the most ambitious and formidable monarchs of the medieval period. Edward III's reign, which began in 1327, came at a time when England's relationship with France was strained. For decades, the English crown had controlled significant territories on the European mainland, remnants of the once vast Angevin Empire established by earlier kings like Henry II. But over time, French kings worked to reclaim these lands, challenging England's influence and fueling resentment on both sides of the Channel. However, the conflict between England and France took on a new dimension when Edward III pressed his claim to the French throne itself. That claim was rooted in his ancestry. Yet the French nobility rejected Edward's claim. Instead, they invoked the Salic law, a legal principle that excluded inheritance of the crown through female lineage and offered the throne to Philip VI from the House of Valois. Edward III, determined to assert his claim, initiated what became known as the 100 Years' War, a protracted series of conflicts between England and France that would dominate European politics for more than a century. Edward III enjoyed significant military success, expanding England's territories and prestige. But war came at a high cost. Prolonged campaigns strained the economy, led to heavy taxation, and deepened divisions within English society. Meanwhile, his eldest son and heir, Edward of Woodstock, known to history as the Black Prince, emerged as one of England's most celebrated military leaders, especially after his decisive role at Poitiers. But the Black Prince's promising future was cut short. He fell gravely ill, likely due to dysentery or another debilitating condition contracted during his campaigns, and died in 1376. With the death of the Black Prince and the aging Edward III nearing the end of his reign, England's future rested on the shoulders of a child. The Black Prince's only surviving son, Richard of Bordeaux, became the next in line to the throne. When Edward III died in 1377, the 10-year-old Richard was crowned King Richard II of England. Richard's accession marked the beginning of a new chapter for the kingdom. England was still embroiled in the 100 Years' War, facing economic difficulties and navigating the aftershocks of the Black Death. Richard of Bordeaux, as he was known in his youth, was born on the 6th of January 1367 in the city of Bordeaux, located in the Duchy of Aquitaine, a region in southwestern France that was at the time under English control. He was the second son of Edward the Black Prince and Joan of Kent, known for her beauty and political connections within the English court. Richard's older brother Edward of Angoulême was initially the heir apparent, but he died young, leaving Richard as the only surviving legitimate son of the Black Prince. From birth, Richard was destined to inherit both high expectations and immense responsibility. His father, the Black Prince, was celebrated across Europe as a skilled military commander and heir to the English throne. His victories at battles like Poitiers had elevated the prestige of the Plantagenet dynasty. But the health of the Black Prince was already declining by the time of Richard's birth. Years of campaigning had taken their toll, and his illness grew progressively worse. Richard's early years were spent between Bordeaux and England. Although still a child, his position as the grandson of King Edward III and the heir to the throne placed him under constant attention. The political climate in England during Richard's childhood was complex. While Edward III had once been seen as a strong and capable monarch, by the 1370s his rule had weakened. The court was divided, war expenditures were draining the economy, and public dissatisfaction was growing. In 1376, tragedy struck. His father, the Black Prince, succumbed to his long illness. The once mighty military leader, who many had expected to follow Edward III, was gone. Just a year later, in 1377, King Edward III died, closing the chapter on a reign that had lasted half a century. England, still entangled in the 100 Years' War, struggling with internal divisions and burdened by financial strain, now turned to a boy king. On the 16th of July, 1377 at Westminster Abbey, Richard II was crowned King of England. Richard's minority meant that real power lay with a council of regents and advisors, many of whom were members of the nobility or close relatives, including his uncles, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester. These men, ambitious and influential, effectively governed in the young king's name while shaping both the court's politics and the future of the realm. Richard's early reign coincided with a period of profound social and economic upheaval in England. The long war with France, now in its fourth decade, had placed enormous strain on the population. Heavy taxation was imposed to finance military campaigns, with the burden falling disproportionately on the lower classes. The devastation of the Black Death, which had swept through England in the 1340s and again in later waves, had reduced the population significantly, creating labor shortages and upsetting the traditional feudal order. Peasants and laborers, now essential to the economy, began to demand better wages and greater freedoms. But the English government, dominated by the landed aristocracy, resisted these changes. Laws such as the Statute of Labourers in 1351 were introduced to freeze wages and tie workers to their lords, fueling resentment among the lower classes. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1381 with the outbreak of what would become known as the Peasants Revolt, one of the most significant uprisings in medieval English history. The immediate cause of the revolt was the introduction of a third poll tax within 4 years, a flat-rate tax applied to every individual, regardless of income. The revolt began in the county of Essex in May 1381, but quickly spread across the southeast of England, including Kent and East Anglia. Thousands of peasants, labourers, and disenfranchised townspeople mobilised, many armed with little more than farm tools and makeshift weapons. Under the leadership of figures like Wat Tyler and the radical preacher John Ball, the rebels marched towards London, fueled by a demand for justice and the removal of corrupt officials. For the 14-year-old Richard II, the uprising presented his first real crisis as king. The capital itself was vulnerable. The rebels entered London with little resistance, targeting symbols of royal authority and privilege. Notably, they destroyed the Savoy Palace, the grand residence of John of Gaunt, Richard's uncle, whom many blamed for the kingdom's mismanagement and the burdens of taxation. Amidst the chaos, Richard made the bold decision to personally confront the rebels. On June 13, 1381, he rode to Mile End outside the city to meet their demands, offering promises of reform, including the abolition of serfdom and the reduction of taxes. His willingness to engage directly with the insurgents temporarily eased tensions, showcasing an unusual degree of composure for a monarch so young. However, the situation remained volatile. The next day, during a second meeting at Smithfield, the rebel leader Wat Tyler was killed under disputed circumstances, either during negotiations or following a confrontation with royal officials. Tyler's death marked a turning point. Richard, seizing the moment, declared himself the protector of the people, urging the rebels to disperse and assuring them that their grievances would be addressed. While many returned home, believing change was imminent, the king's promises were quickly reversed. Once order was restored, the rebellion's leaders were hunted down, and harsh reprisals followed. In the years that followed, Richard began to view his kingship through a distinct lens. His experience during the revolt reinforced his belief in the divine right of kings and the need for centralized authority.